Hello, I'll give you all a minute
Hello.
to connect. Hi,
Hi, folks.
good to see you all, as always. We've had a long break, so it's good to see you all coming back.
Hello, good to be back.
Lovely. Lovely.
Yeah, thank you for running this. It is really good.
Thank you. Thank you, Sue. Thank you for saying it.
Oh, wow. I'm sure everyone's thinking it. They're all on mute.
It is.
Look
Well,
at them, yeah, and
thank you.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be here.
Yeah, exactly.
It's good to hear sometimes, it is. I apologize for the flags behind me. I've just had a launch party just before this event. I had a launch party for the audiobook for my mole, A Mole Like No Other, read by a lovely Alison Larkin, who is I'm very lucky to have her. So we've just had an international party on Zoom, of course. So I've decided to keep them up there just to make it more cheerful.
Oh, brilliant. How's your book going?
Not bad. Not bad. I mean, it obviously has ups and downs, but generally it is well received and I'm very pleased about it. My Molly is here. Shall I show it to him?
Yeah, come on. We need a promotion. We need a book promotion as well.
Hello.
Hello.
Another minute until official start. So he is here. It's now 7 o'clock. Welcome to SDS Thursday. And we've had a long Easter break. And today we are back with an absolutely brand new course, which we've never run before. And that's my computer now making funny noises and informing me of this meeting. Yes, it will be an event with Paul Grantham. But for now, if I, as always, ask you to write a few words in the chat box, saying hello, telling us where you are in the world. Have you been to any of our events before, or is it the first one you're attending? It's always very helpful. We read your comments always and say, oh, look, new place, new name. So it's always very, very useful for us. And also a bit of feedback to know that people are joining us from different places in the world. So today's event is, as I said, about a brand new course, and I will share my screen and show you how to find this course. I do it in the beginning so people have chance to log in, because as I can see in the waiting room, there's still plenty of people coming in. And also it enables you to run away at the end of it very quickly and have some dinner. So let's talk about finding this course. Yeah, it worked, the share?
Yep.
Yep. Excellent. So the new course is actually a certificate. It is BPS approved certificate, and you find it by going to certificates and diplomas tab on the website. And at the moment it is number 3 on the list. And it's got a very long name, so I'll read the name. It's Integrated CBT for Common Life Challenges, or another name is BPS Approved Certificate in Non-Diagnostic Psychological Problems. It is a big certificate. It consists of 15 modules, plus the 16th is a module on procrastination. And in a minute, you'll understand why I'm talking of procrastination separately. So the 15 modules are all very brief. They are 2-hour lunchtime bite-sized modules. So they'll be running at lunchtime between 12 and 2 for 2 hours on Zoom, 2 hours per event, per module. Procrastination is slightly different. It is actually a full 2 days. Zoom event, and it's already advertised for October, but it is counted as a one module for this particular course. This course is approved by BPS, so we give it our SDS accreditation. And in order to book it, you can book it module by module. The modules are sort of low price point. I think it's £60. You can book it module by module, or you can take advantage of our offer and you can book 5 modules for the price of 4. So the 5th module comes for free. So for that, you need to call the office and tell the office what modules you want to book with that particular offer. And for every 5 2-hour modules, you are getting one level of SDS accreditation in working with non-diagnostic problems. So therefore, when you do them all, you can have the highest level of accreditation is level 4. That will be 3 lots of 5s plus procrastination. I know it sounds all a bit mind sort of boggling, but it's all written on the website and you can see it if you click on accreditation. When you book, if you want to take advantage of this book for have one for free offer, you need to call the office, and because not all the modules have the dates yet, you nevertheless can book on the module even though it doesn't have the date yet, so you can actually book the modules which you are interested in. So the full list of modules, you click on the outline and you'll see the full list of modules which you can choose from. And they're actually all available, just some of them don't have dates attached to them yet. So for example, dealing with rejection has a date and working with envy doesn't have a date yet. But if you want to book, say, imposter syndrome, which we're talking about today, with envy, you can by ringing the office and telling us what modules you want to book. I hope it makes sense. I think it'll become clearer when Paul goes through the practicalities a little further. So Paul, have I missed anything, or you're happy to take over now? You have to unmute yourself because you've muted yourself.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, no, I'm happy to take over now if you'd like.
Thank you. Paul, please.
All right, well, welcome, folks. After what feels like an extraordinarily long break, actually. It probably hasn't been, but it just feels like it. So it's all good to see you all again. And it's good to see you all again with sharing with you some of the things that we're going to be looking at within the first module that's actually going to be running in this new certificate for non-diagnostic problems. If I could just add a little bit in terms of what Julia said about this and why we put it together. It struck us that a couple of things really. The first one was that obviously, I guess like me, you find yourself frequently working with problems which are typically diagnostic. People will come to us with problems with anxiety, depression, etc. But it's also worth adding, I'm sure that you know as well as I do, that many of the issues that people come along with, and particularly the issues that are most pressing for them, are actually of a slightly different nature very often. So, and I felt that there's not really enough around at the moment which provides ideas, training, practical ideas about how to work with these. So we've taken a whole range of very common non-diagnostic problems, of which we're starting off with imposter syndrome, which I'll say a little bit about in a moment. And then there's a whole range of other ones, as Julie's already mentioned, rejection, low self-esteem, and so on and so forth. You can see the whole list there. All of those are 2 hours in length. As Julia said, they are deliberately designed as lunchtime bite-sized events. So you can sit there with your sandwiches or whatever and participate. The only exception to the rule on that is a 2-day event on procrastination. which is well, I'll say more about that on another occasion, but is basically a program, a very practical program, deliberately designed to address procrastination problems, which certainly has already been used at my end with over 200 clients. So it's a well-established, well bedded in program, and that particular one, incidentally, even more probably than the others, is designed not just for practitioners like you and I, but it's also designed as well for clients too. So it's one of those well, from our perspective anyway, unusual sort of training modules, really, where it's something that might be of interest to your clients as well as to you. So that's the overall program of it. But as I said, we're starting off with looking at imposter syndrome, and it's probably worth just telling you why we've started off with this, because I was actually quite suspicious about whether there would actually be a great deal of interest in this particular type of problem. It's one that certainly that I've come across, I'm familiar with and have worked with, but I didn't for some reason think it was going to be of broad interest to folks. And then basically we conducted a survey, and now I can't remember, a month or two ago, asking folks to basically indicate out of the whole list of different topic areas which we were going to provide training on, which were the ones they showed most interest in. And much to my amazement, top of the list by far was imposter syndrome. So that's where we're starting off, folks. And it's obviously what I want to give you a little taster of today. We obviously are only going to be able to look at a taster, and for that particular reason, obviously, to make an obvious point here, we are going to be going into a lot more detail on the actual training event. But I thought we'll start off with just having a look at how that works and some of the issues that are around with this, particularly if it's something that maybe you've heard about, are not familiar with, or maybe it's the case that you've come across clients with this as a problem who you've been thinking to yourself, well, is this just a lack of confidence issue? Is this a self-esteem issue, or is it something else? So I wanted to have a little bit of a look at that. Or alternatively, it may actually be something that you yourself are interested in personally, because as I'm going to mention in a minute, imposter syndrome is extraordinarily common amongst counselors and therapists, extraordinarily common. Now, we're not going to be able to get into a great deal of detail about why that's the case this evening, but certainly we'll be unpackaging that on the actual day itself. So I'm going to share my screen with you now so that you can partake of what we've actually got here on the presentation. And hopefully you can all see that, okay? So what I'm going to do, folks, is I'm going to give you a very broad overview of this particular area. I'm going to touch on certain issues which we're going to be expanding on in a lot more detail during the course of the 2-hour session that we'll be having when this actually runs. And I also wanted to very briefly take you through a case study with somebody that I've worked with, just to give you some idea about how this was actually approached. So for those of you that are not actually familiar with the concept, the imposter phenomenon, as it was originally sort of termed, was recognized or identified by Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes back in the late 70s. They called it imposter phenomenon at the time. It's been given a range of names since then. The one that has probably stuck the most is imposter syndrome, but it's also called imposterism, Ford syndrome, and the imposter experience. And what Clance sort of said was that this was an experience which individuals had, and certainly in her original research, she argued that this was something which was particularly prone amongst high achieving women. We'll come back to that particular issue in a minute, because we now know that that's strictly speaking not true as being the only group that are affected by this. But when she originally looked at this back in the late 70s, that was seen as being the primary group of individuals who had this as a problem. They went through a particular, what Clark's described as imposter cycle. I'll very briefly go through that in a minute, but we will of course unpackage it in more detail on the day. But there are other characteristics as well with this, which they both identified as being particularly important. The need to be special or the best at what it is that you do. And I guess one of the implications of that is a difficulty tolerating being less than the best. And associated with that are characteristics of being a Superman or a Superwoman, which you might think is the same, but actually is slightly different in terms of what is believed to be important by individuals who suffer from this. An overwhelming fear of failure, a denial of ability and discounting of praise. So one of the interesting elements of this is the tendency to screen out the results of what it is that you do. So even though you might be successful in what you do, even though you may get positive feedback from other people in terms of what you're actually doing, this is heavily discounted. And also the other thing that is interestingly discounted, maybe not surprisingly given these other characteristics, is the fact that one's own ability is discounted, or what actually happens is that the success is attributed to some other characteristic, which I'll mention in a minute. And also a general feeling of fear and guilt about success. And the idea really that at the end of the day, one is just on the cusp of no longer being able to hide one's incompetency, that people are on the cusp of discovering that we ourselves are an imposter in some particular way. So I thought I would just give you a bit of a flavor of this with some common expressions that certainly I've come across in terms of the way in which clients have expressed this, and also to give you a few famous examples as well, which I thought would be quite useful. So the first one is from Carol, who's an IT manager, who just simply said, they're going to find out I'm no good and think I deliberately pulled the wool over their eyes. This is, again, can I just emphasize, this was somebody who was moderately successful in their particular post, very competent at what they did. They were actually managing other IT professionals at the time, but retained this very strong belief that basically that they're kidding people really at the end of the day. I've got Mark down here, who is a counselor that I saw. I'm going to fail all of my clients and let them down. They expect so much and I can't deliver it. It's going to be unbearable. This was actually stated at the time when Mark had moved into a new job, and I'll come back to that issue later on. CJ, who I've decided to anonymize here for probably obvious reasons, so that I just can't perform in the way the boss expects. I'm going to be humiliated, which is a very interesting way of framing this. Not that particularly he was going to humiliate his boss. And then Janice, who was an insurance actuary, it's only a matter of time before they realize I can't do this. I'm not an expert. I don't actually know what I'm doing. This particular person, by the way, had been working as an actuary in the insurance industry, I think for something like about 15, 20 years, had a postgraduate degree in this particular field, and was certainly looked up to by a range of other folks. However, this is not something which purely expresses itself for individuals who are doing daily jobs, for want of a better term. We've got large numbers of examples of famous people expressing exactly the same thing. And I've just got a few quotes here from folks that I'm sure you'll be familiar with, or at least mostly familiar with. Kate Winslet, I wake up in the morning before going off to a shoot and think that I can't do this, I'm a fraud. We've got Meryl Streep saying, you think, why would anyone want to see me again in a movie? I don't know how to act anyway, so why am I doing this? Can I just point out that these folks are Oscar worthy, these two folks, and yet they're still saying this. Einstein, The exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler. And can I just say, what I think is very interesting about this particular statement from Einstein is that this was made a very short period of time, few months before his death in 1955. In other words, this was not a temporary phenomenon for him. It was something that clearly had existed throughout all of his career, in fact. Maya Angelou, iconic Black writer. I've written 11 books, but each time I think, oh, they're going to find it out now. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out. Again, this strong belief that this is just all hidden away and that actually my incompetence is going to be suddenly discovered. And then we've got a slightly different statement here from Katarina Johnson-Thompson, who is a world heptathlon champion, can I just emphasize, but who actually said, they say stuff like, I'm headlining and I'm coming over here with #1 status, but I still don't feel like that, she says. I don't feel like I've proved myself yet. Now, just pause on that, folks, because that raises a really interesting question, if I was actually seeing Katerina, I would be very interested in asking her, which is, what is it that would have to happen to provide you with convincing evidence that actually you had proved yourself? What would it be? Anyway, she says, I've just been told I have to have a photo taken with a decathlete, Damien Warner, and I don't want to do this because I don't feel I'm good enough. So these are extremely common experiences. Now, Clance, when she originally put this together with Imiz, went through or constructed what's called the Impostor Cycle. We will go through this in a lot more detail, obviously, when we look at the actual training event. But I thought I would share some of it with you now because it highlights some very interesting questions and interesting things, and it raises other issues which we will tackle on that particular training day, which I think are really important to look at, because I don't think this model is complete. I think it actually explains probably some of the most important common characteristics that are around, but there are some elements of it that are missing. And I think that it's important to know how really our understanding of this particular experience has developed over the last decades when other folks have been working on it. So the starting point with this, which is very interesting, is that the starting point is being engaged in what's called achievement-related tasks. Now, this is obviously about doing things, and it's obviously about success in doing things. I think that this is the main thrust of what's actually behind this as a problem, but it doesn't, can I emphasize, really give enough understanding to other types of expression of imposter syndrome, which are more about statements about us as an individual rather than what it is that we're doing, which I'll come back to on the day, because it has, as I said, some different implications for what we might do with our clients. So it starts off with an achievement-related task, which leads the individual who's engaging in this to be feeling anxious, to doubt themselves, to worry about whether they're good enough. And they then engage in either over preparation or procrastination. Now, for those of you with a CBT background, I suspect that you are going to immediately recognize the fact that these could actually be classified as either safety behaviors or, if they're life strategies, compensatory strategies. But they also lead to different sort of understandings by people about what the actual problem is that's actually occurring. So some folks respond to this anxiety and self-doubt by over-preparing, going overboard with everything that needs to be done, doing more than's actually necessary. In other words, when they tend to finish the task, they attribute it to effort, not to ability, but to effort. I'll come back to that issue in a minute. Other folks, basically in response to their anxiety and worry and self-doubt, engage in that classic avoidance behavior, which is procrastination. Obviously a topic I'm very interested in its own right, as I said earlier. But what's interesting there is that when people do procrastinate and they eventually complete the task, they are much more likely to attribute it to luck. In other words, although I did this thing right at the last moment and I got away with it, which is how it's framed, I only got away with it because I was very lucky. So the thing to realize is that both of these strategies lead to some degree, and I appreciate this is variable, but some degree of accomplishment. In other words, the task is completed, whatever it is that we're having to do, whether it's, whether it's working with a client that we're working with and we get through the session, or we see some improvement in the client, or alternatively, if you're talking about something which is much more practically based, then the particular task is completed there. And what's important is that that gives an immediate feeling of relief. Now, again, what I would say is, and again, I guess this might be more familiar to some of you with a CBT background than others, is that feelings of relief are often associated with negative reinforcement. And I will come back to that and explain that in more detail on the day. But in plain language, what it means is that something bad is taken away. So all of that anxiety and self-doubt and worry is taken away. Okay. So one of the things that's likely to do is it's likely to draw the person back to the strategies that they've used of over preparing or procrastinating. Because I've got there at the end of the day and it's taken the relief away. Sorry, it's given me a sense of relief and taken those bad feelings away. Now, what's interesting about this is that very often, whether it's feedback from the task, i.e. I've managed to do it, or whether it's feedback from another source, other people, I receive positive feedback. I think to myself, I've got that done. I've managed to complete it in time. Or alternatively, somebody comes to me and says, I'm really pleased with that, what you've done. Now, what's really interesting in this particular context is that for people who suffer from imposter syndrome, their tendency is to discount that positive feedback, to not accept it. And there's a whole range of beliefs that tend to come into play here, which are used to do that. I'll come back to these later on, but everything from selective attention to decrying the value of effort. I mean, that's a really interesting one, that although I might have done this, I've had to put an enormous amount of effort in. And if I was really, truly good at what I would do, it would just come simply to me. So in other words, bizarrely, the effort I've put in is used as evidence for discounting the positive feedback that I actually get. Obviously, if I attribute my success to luck, again, I discount any positive feedback that's actually around, as I'm sure you're aware. I think this is incidentally very common amongst counselors and therapists. They frequently, basically say that if something did not go very well with my client, then that is because I'd failed to do something. But if something did go well with my client, I hit lucky today. So that tendency to discount success in terms of luck. So that discounting of evidence, that discounting of positive feedback leads the individual to perceive themselves as fraudulent in some way. And actually, in a bizarre way, they become more self-doubtful. And the more self-doubtful you become, obviously, the more distress it creates, but also the more you're drawn back to those strategies which you've been relying on, which are over preparation or procrastination. So actually, the whole thing becomes very much a negative feedback loop. Things are never, in a sense, no matter how many successes you have, they are never enough. And I think that's part of the problem, because the positive feedback that you get from those successes, you end up discounting. So some very brief data here on epidemiology, so you can know what the situation is here. This is extraordinarily common. How common it is, to be honest with you, is dependent on a number of definitions. The 70% Gravois statistic is one which I think is slightly misleading, because that was looking at things where there was a single instance in people's lives. I'll come back to that in a minute, because I think that that is something which is slightly different. But the Bravata study, which is more recent, is a meta-analysis that's looked at over 14,000 participants, admittedly using different criteria. But we're still talking between about 1 in 10 and over 80% of people who are asked. So you know about this in terms of where to benchmark this. For example, this is certainly higher than the presentation for any one diagnostic mental health problem that folks might be referred with. So there's a couple of questions I think need to be asked here, because I suspect that by this stage, the majority of you are looking at this and thinking, yep, I can relate to this. I've had this experience. So the question is it always a problem? Or is it something which actually, in some instances, we shouldn't be taking too seriously, but in other instances, it does create a problem and needs to be addressed in some particular way? And how is that defined? So we're going to spend some time on that when we look at the actual day. Secondly, does it have actually any upsides? One of the things that has subsequently been discovered is that there are some advantages with having imposter syndrome, and I'll be going through those on the actual day. So I suppose what I'm saying is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater on this. It has some plus sides. And also, what is the primary difference between short-term imposter syndrome and long-term imposter syndrome? And why I think this is important sort of slightly touches on the issue about when does this become a problem, or when is it not a problem. I think that the vast majority of people, when they come into a new job in particular, or a new role, and people see them in that new job or new role, I think imposter syndrome is extraordinarily, I would almost say, universal to some degree. But what I think actually happens for a sizable proportion of people is that disappears with time. You know, if you think about situations yourselves, when you come into a new job, you've probably had this experience, but then, I don't know, 6 months, a year, 2 months down the road, it's not such a pressing issue. You might not have totally lost it, but it's not with you in the same way. For other folks, however, it is. Every new task, every new presentation almost seems to feed their sense that actually they're conning people in some particular way. So what makes the difference between those two? Because that's obviously, again, got some important implications for the way in which we might work with clients or work with ourselves on this. Gender differences. As I said, clients originally saw this as something related to high achieving women. There's certainly some issues around which indicate that the experience is different for men and women, but it's certainly not the case. We now know that this is something which is exclusively related to women, let alone high achieving women, can I hasten to add. There are, however, differences in the experience, and I think that there are very different reasons as well why these two things occur for men and women. And I guess I wanted to spend some time on that, because again, it's got some different implications. And also, how does this overlap, and how is it different, or how is it the same from things like poor self-confidence, depression, anxiety, perfectionism, and low self-esteem? Are they the same as imposter syndrome? Are they different? Is there an overlap? We do know that when folks suffer from imposter syndrome, They are also, in many instances, but not all, but in many instances, more prone to problems with depression and anxiety. But maybe there's something that's also a bit different about this, and we'll open that up. And as I said right at the beginning, is it always associated with task-based activity, or are there certain other things which are maybe not properly recognized as playing a key role in this? So one area that Clarence was particularly interested in, and which she originally, I think, attributed a lot of the problems to, related to family upbringing. I'm not going to, partly because of time, to be honest with you, I'm not going to go through these, but also you can read through these yourselves, but also just to emphasize the fact that subsequent research on the whole has not supported this. Certainly not in the sense that the specific characteristics that Clarence identified actually operate for all imposters. We got no real evidence of that, and certainly in controlled studies, they're not the case. And there's a couple of exceptions to the rule on this. We know that there is a weak but consistent association with family overprotection of children. The mechanisms that are operating here, not much research done on it. I personally have some speculation on it, which I'd like to share with you when we come to the actual day. But that's really the only factor that's sort of been clearly identified as having a consistent, but even there, not particularly strong effect. There's much stronger associations with two characteristics in the individual themselves, which can incidentally come from a variety of sources, of which I suspect family is one, but it's not the only one. Perfectionism is very strongly associated with imposter syndrome, and ability, which is very interesting. In other words, individuals who are the most competent at what they do, with the greatest eye for detail, and who are naturally the hardest on themselves in wanting to get things exactly right, are in fact the individuals who are most prone to developing this. And you don't, can I just emphasize here, I'm sure you can relate to this yourselves, you don't have to necessarily be a high achiever to actually have those particular characteristics. So that suggests that there are some givens about us as people, which, or maybe givens is too strong a word, some pre-existing characteristics about us as people, which lead us to be more prone to this than others are. So there are some unanswered questions in the field, which I want to spend some time looking at on our time together in the training, on the training day. The key role of the individual as a social object. This is recognized, but is not properly expressed, in my opinion. And by social object, what I mean is the individual being conscious of being observed or thinking that they are being observed by others. This is one of the reasons why I put down this question. Why don't new car drivers suffer from imposter syndrome? New car drivers know that they're not very good. They're very anxious about it. They lack confidence, etc. But I don't think I've ever come across a car driver who's just passed their test, who basically says, oh my goodness, all those other people on the road are going to guess that I'm not a very good car driver. I just don't think that that's a common thought. And this has all got to do with viewing yourself as what's called a social object. This, incidentally, is a concept which is very familiar within the CBT field with regards to social anxiety. And I think it also applies here. And we've got some very good, well-proven strategies for how to address that. The other thing is the environment that you're in. There are certain environments which are worse than others. These environments, incidentally, are generally speaking different for men and women. Yeah, I'll say no more about that at the moment, but again, we unpackage what that actually is on the day. And the other thing is that these are environments where individuals are, in reality, more prone to being exposed to social judgment. Now, this incidentally is one of the reasons why I think counselors and therapists can often be more prone to imposter syndrome, because clients have high expectations and they communicate them, and they are forming judgments of us as practitioners, as therapists, as counselors, and we are conscious of that. We're conscious of that. And I think that being in that environment, even from a single individual we're seeing as a client, plays a key role in this. And I'll be saying a little bit more about how to address that and to manage it on the actual day. Some folks are more prone than others to developing imposter syndrome. And again, I think there's a core role here for core beliefs and underlying assumptions. Again, we'll unpackage that and how to address it on the day. And for those of you that haven't recognized this, you can clearly see that there is an issue here regarding selective attention. You know, this classic example of the person with imposter syndrome discounting all the evidence that suggests that what they've done is competent, and selectively ignoring that, and instead deciding to selectively attend to the things that are not 100%. So that is why very often the individual can't even identify what it would be that would need to happen to convince them that they were not an imposter, because they're selectively attending to the absence of that. As I'm sure a number of you with a CBT background will be aware, one of the major sources of information we often take when we've got psychological problems. So it doesn't matter that everybody thinks that we're fabulous, because we have our own thoughts that we're not, that we use as evidence that we're not good enough. I wanted to very briefly, before we finish, just take you through an example of this with a particular client that I worked with. This was Caroline, who'd been experiencing imposter syndrome, she said, on and off for about an 11-year period. And it was expressed solely within a work context. There are other areas of her life, by the way, where she would be seen as demonstrating, I think, by other people, competence, but she didn't have the same doubts about that. But certainly within a work context, it was being expressed in practically every area, in supervision with her supervisees, in her work with clients. This term secular managerial relationships, which I found out earlier today people aren't always familiar with, actually relates to her meetings with other managers within her organization who did not have a counseling background. And here, you know, this sort of statement that she made here, I think, sort of summed up really how she felt. There's just increasing pressure to sort things, she said. I reassure and behave as if I'm confident in what I say, but it's only a question of time. And when she says a question of time, it's only a question of time before I slip up or people find out what I'm really like. And she sought help, can I say, in anticipation of being found out. So I actually saw her for a total of 5 sessions. What I've got here is a very simple summary of what we did in those 5 sessions, which was to normalize the experience, first of all, both in terms of information provision, and also I got her to survey folks to find out what their experience was, to test out the primary belief that she had, which is that I'm the only one. So again, from a CBT background, we've got a small behavioral experiment that was used here. The other thing, and this is again very common with negative, strongly held beliefs, is that actually when you try and ask somebody what they mean by something, and particularly its absence, they have real problems with it. And when I said, so you feel that you're an imposter, and she said, yeah, I am. I know I am. I can see evidence for it. My natural next question was, well, what would a non-imposter actually look like? How could you spot someone who's not an imposter? And we spent quite a bit of time on that, because in a sense, for her to be able to make an accurate judgment of herself, she needed to actually have some clear criteria to do it. So we spent some time on that. We looked at some key assumptions that she held. If I behave as if I'm competent, then I'll be discovered. I must always try and fulfill the expectation of others. And we did some work on that, very simple work actually, which was just using basic cognitive restructuring to weaken those particular beliefs, and a self-imagery technique, which was primarily used to reduce the perception of social judgment. In other words, people with imposter syndrome spend a large amount of their time thinking about other people and what other people are thinking about them, rather than thinking about what they themselves are actually doing. And we use a particular imagery technique to, in a sense, provide a perceptual boundary for the person concerned. So she was actually only seen for 5 sessions. The situation when we did a follow-up, which was 3 months later, was that she said to me that this was still something she occasionally came across, but it was nowhere near as intense. And most importantly for her, it wasn't interfering with her personal life in the way in which it had been previously. And I received a further email from her probably about another 7-8 months after that, where those changes were still being maintained. So folks, I know that's a very rapid run through, and the whole point is to give you more of a flavor of this when we come on to the 2 days. Sorry, 2 days, the 2 hours rather. But I'll leave it at this point and pass you back to Julia. I don't know if folks have got any questions or whether we've got time for questions at all, Julia.
If I ask you to stop sharing first, yeah, if it's okay.
Is that stop sharing?
No, you're still sharing.
How bizarre, because it's not giving me that.
It's okay. It's okay. I'll give you time to do that. Yeah, I'll do it from my. Yeah. So I think it was a valiant effort by Paul to fit his 2-hour presentation in 30 minutes one. No surprise he's overrun. It was a valiant effort. And I will only just give you some answers about the technical side of things and about how to book the course. So first of all, this particular event, the Thursday event, will be recorded. It is recorded now. I'll edit it, and it will be available for free for anybody who wants to watch it again. So we are not giving out the presentation for this, but the event will be available. As for the course is on SDS website, and until tomorrow, you still have introductory offer, £50 instead of £60. I know I mentioned it was £60, but if you book it sort of today, it expires tomorrow, you can still book this course at £50 price plus VAT. And the course will take place on the 4th of June this year, 2021. And from 12 to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So 12 noon to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It will be recorded. And for everyone who booked on the course, the recording will be available immediately. So if you think you don't know whether you will be able to come or not, book the course and you will get a recording straight away after the course. And we currently actually don't reduce the time when you can watch recording. So more or less you can watch it forever. It will be available to you. Whether we will be continuing selling it as a recording, we don't know. The plan currently, because people ask me whether we will be repeating these courses, the plan currently to do these 15 topics, hopefully by the end of next year, we will finish with these 15 or 16 topics, and maybe start adding to them rather than repeating them again. But we'll consult with you, we'll send another survey and ask whether people want topics repeated or added to it. But the plan at the moment is to do that and have these topics as recordings for you to watch. So that's what we are planning at the moment. And yes, ignore what it says on the website about 7 CPD hours. It is 2 hours. We have technical problems simply because the website was created when we were all working in the room for 7 hours, and now we're doing 2 hours events, and they just don't correspond with what the website is saying. So 2 hours CPD and ignore 7 hours. I think, Paul, because it's quickly approaching 8 o'clock, we'll probably leave the questions. There were not that many questions. There were some good questions, but I think people are coming on your 2-hour course. So we'll leave the questions for now and just hope that you will come to the course to ask them. And also, I wanted to just take you through very, very briefly through the future events free Thursdays, because we've updated it and we've got a very nice lineup for you. So we've done today, on the 29th of April, we are having an event with Linda Graham, a best-selling author of books on resilience, and she's doing an event for us later on in May and June. And Linda will be joining us from California. So it will be an event around her book, Bouncing Back, Reviewing Your Brain, Rewiring Your Brain for Maximum Resilience. So that's 29th of April. Then on the 13th of May, Paul will do another session like this on self-esteem in anticipation of a self-esteem module of this certificate. Then on the 20th of May, we are having another guest, Diane Goddard. Probably you know her as a founder of National Center for Eating Disorders. And Diane will be talking about eating disorders and working with eating disorders, and particularly introducing the event which Paul will be running for together with National Center for Eating Disorders for leading Socratic questioning with people suffering from eating disorders. On the 3rd of June, we are having here Professor Nuna Ferreira with ACT. Nuna Ferreira always teaches ACT for us, and he'll be doing a particular exercise with us called Passengers on the Bus, and how to introduce organizing metaphors in ACT. So that's 3rd of June. And then 17th of June, last for this year, we will have a video interview recorded, because we can't run an event at 7 in the evening with Australia because it's in the middle of the night there. But it will be very exciting because we have Tony Atwood and Michelle Garnett coming back, doing 2 exclusive masterclasses for SDS in September and in November. And in June, we will be introducing those events. So as you can see, the program is very interesting, and we hope to see you on more Thursdays. But for now, you can unmute yourself and say goodbye. Good to see you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Take
Goodbye.
care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was so good.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Julie.
Bye.
Take care.
You too. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.